there are a lot of things that affect our mental health. Some of these things are what I call mental tension, where if these things are in balance, we generally feel pretty good. And if they're out of balance, we often feel pretty bad, like depressed or upset, or some degree of lack of mental health. And what I'm talking about in this video is based on my reading of this book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. This is a very famous book. Viktor Frankl was a survivor of the Nazi concentration camps in World War II. And what he talks about in this book really is psychology and how he used principles of psychology, ways of controlling his thoughts and his outlook on his situation in order to maintain the necessary degree of mental health that was able to help him to survive the concentration camps. Now, these things I want to talk about, I call mental tensions, and there's 3 of them that I've identified in this book. There are probably plenty more, but these 3 types of mental tension are things that we try to keep in balance. And if we can keep them in balance, this is good, we feel pretty good. One of these is the difference between where we are today and where we would like to be in the future. Okay? If the difference is so great between where we are and where we want to be that we lose all sense of hope that we could actually get there, that's like a situation where that type of balance, that mental tension is out of balance, and it's out of balance to a degree that it hurts us. Most people have a balance where they're like, okay, I am here today, I want to get to this point tomorrow or next year or 10 years from now, and I have a sense that I can do that. Like, I can bridge this gap between here and there in the time frame that I would like. All right, this provides us a sense of agency, and that's a healthy balance. But if it gets so far out of balance that you lose all hope for the future, that can be really unhealthy. All right, now that's one type of mental tension. There's another type of mental tension, which is the balance between the skill level that you have and the challenge that you are presented with. All right, and if you have what you think is the necessary skills to meet the challenge, like the circumstances that you're in, then again, you have this feeling of agency, like, yes, I can handle this situation that I'm in. All right, and that's a healthy balance. Like, generally, we find ourselves in situations where you have to use some sort of skill, to get through the day, things that are required of you at school or at work or in relationships or whatever. And when we feel like we have a good handle on it, when we have the necessary skills to be able to meet the challenge, that feels good. All right, we have a sense of like mental harmony, mental health. But when we feel like we completely lack the skills necessary to meet the challenge, then despair can set in, where we feel like, wow, there's no way that I can get over this hurdle, so I'm not even going to try. All right, so that's another type of mental tension. That's the second type. And then the third type is a tension that I referred to in the last video, and this is a tension between what Timothy Wilson in this book, Strangers to Ourselves, talked about, and it's the tension between our unconscious selves and our conscious selves, meaning our conscious self is the type of person you think you are on a day-to-day basis, and the types of behaviors and the way that you think you would respond to certain situations. The unconscious self is the part of you that sort of, we say, comes out in situations where you have like an automatic response, and it's usually situations where there's a lot of stress or a lot of emotion involved. And if we act in those types of situations in a way that we're proud of, in a way that we're like, oh yeah, that's totally how I wanted to have acted. All right, that's a healthy balance between the unconscious self and the conscious self. But when you act in such a way, when you have such a behavior that you're like, oh man, I totally regret that. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what I was thinking. That's an unhealthy balance. When you have too much of a difference between how you wanted to act according to your conscious self and what actually came out, the behavior that you actually produced which is based on this automatic unconscious self. All right, so these are three types of mental tensions where if they're in balance, we feel pretty good. And if they get out of balance, we can often feel pretty bad. And I have a quote from Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl says, "What man needs is not a tensionless state, okay, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task." So what he's saying is the goal is not to be in a completely tensionless, where there's no mental tension, where you feel like whatever challenge is presented to you, you can easily accomplish without even trying, where you feel like whatever goals you want to achieve are easily accomplished, this sort of thing. What he's saying is there is a healthy balance. There's a healthy amount of tension, that mental tension that you can have in your life, particularly when it comes to things you want to achieve. But when these things are out of balance, that's when we can often feel pretty bad. And okay, so this lack of balance often occurs over a range, right? I mean, you can feel like, okay, the challenge that's presented to me is a little bit more than I can handle, but it's not so great that I feel completely hopeless, okay? Or you can be in a situation where it's like, there's no way that, I can address this challenge. I don't have any of the skills necessary. And the type of emotional response we have to those situations occurs over a range, right? And that's, pretty consistent with how far out of balance, these tensions typically are. And, some disbalance is common. Now, I said, and Viktor Frankl referred to the fact that you want to have, some tension, but even being outside the bounds of healthy tension is normal. Like we all, typically feel some sort of despair regarding the future, or we often, it's not uncommon to feel like we're over our heads in a certain situation. So that's normal. But the fact that it's normal, he comments on this. He says, because this was it's a very, very famous book. He sold millions of copies, whatever. And he says in the book, "I do not at all see in the bestseller status of my book an achievement and accomplishment on my part, but rather an expression of the misery of our time." He goes, "If hundreds of thousands of people reach out for a book whose very title promises to deal with the question of a meaning to life, it must be a question that burns under their fingernails," right? So, I mean, he's referring to the fact that because his book titled Man's Search for Meaning, okay, was so famous, the conclusion that he drew was that there are so many people out there who are looking for answers, who are struggling, and they can't find a way out of their situation. They have these mental tensions that are way out of balance, and they can't figure out how to put them in balance. And so he wrote this book, he wrote this book, and then he realized how many people were struggling with the same types of things that he was struggling with in the concentration camp. Now, obviously, for the vast majority of us, thankfully, we never go through an experience, the likes of which he had to go through in the concentration camp. But his point is, the same types of mental trouble that he had and the challenges are very similar to the mental challenges we all face, just to a different degree, and certainly in different circumstances. Now, there's two ways that we can find a healthy balance, at least two ways. This is, what I gathered from my reading of the book. One is luck, okay? You could have, you could be taking the perfect classes in school, you could have your dream job, or, you could never be put in a situation where, you have these automatic unconscious responses that you later regret or feel, depressed about, or some sort of, shame regarding. That's luck. When life just gives you just the perfect circumstances and everything's flowing great and you feel wonderful and there's no reason for you to have any lack of mental harmony. Okay, these three mental tensions are in a healthy balance and you feel good. All right, that happens. It's fortunately, but there are plenty of times right, in everybody's life when luck runs out, when you're not in these perfect situations, right? I mean, there's the phrase, like, in every life a little rain must fall. I mean, you know, that's like an understatement, obviously. You know, and his point is that when we're in these situations, all right, when life does not present us with these ideal conditions, we need to have skills, like internal mental skills necessary to help bring these tensions back into balance, all right, so that we can achieve a healthy degree of mental health, mental harmony, or at least the healthiest degree that we can achieve given the circumstances. And he has a quote. He says in the book, "Forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing, your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation." Sorry. It's just a quote, right? All right. You cannot control, right, what happens to you. I don't know why I'm like this. Fortunately, I don't know any of you, so I don't have to feel too embarrassed. You cannot control what happens to you in life, but you can always control what you will feel and do about what happens to you. All right. Now, this is coming from a man who was in, you know, some of the most inhuman conditions, you know, in history, right? And he's saying, it's like, yeah, there are times, you don't have to be in a concentration camp. There are times in your life when you just can't control your situation, right? You can't control your circumstances, but you can choose, you can control, if you have the skill, you can control how you mentally respond to them, how your circumstances affect you, what you think of the circumstances, how you deal with your emotional response to the circumstances. His point is that you can control this if you have certain skills. Now, here's the deal. It's each of us, okay, needs to develop these skills on our own. Not like in a vacuum where you can't have anybody's help developing these skills, but you have to, this is my perspective, you have to develop your own skills. Nobody can do this for you. Why? Because when you go through life, like, we all have very unique personalities, we have unique circumstances, right? I mean, nobody has the same exact personality in the same exact circumstance, you know, with the same exact, you know, problems and skills and, you know, whatever else as you do, all right? And every day, okay, just about, part of your struggle, you know, as like being a human being is trying to achieve a healthy balance in these three mental tensions, right? And, you know, you can't always like reach out to a guru or an expert or watch a YouTube video or whatever. I mean, it's like, because anybody, you know, giving you advice, generally speaking from his own perspective, and he doesn't know you exactly the way you know yourself. So you need to develop these skills yourself so that you can tweak how you apply these, you know, mental skills to achieve balance in your own life, you know, whether it's a minute by minute case, if you're like really in a bad mental health situation, or a day by day or month by month or year by year. But we all go through times when we have to have the mental strength to find the balance. And really, it comes down to each of us to do it for ourselves. He has a quote, okay, to put the question in general terms would be comparable to the question posed to a chess champion, okay? And he says, tell me, master, what is the best move in the world? All right? There simply is no such thing as the best or even a good move apart from a particular situation in a game and the particular personality of one's opponent. Right? His point is, like, there's no one best move to achieve mental health, to achieve mental harmony, right? Because it depends on the situation. It depends on the game, right? Just like chess. There's no one move that's going to get you to checkmate every time, right? There's a series of moves. In any game, there's a series of moves, right? And so, you know, his point is you need to have the skills to know how to adapt your approach to achieve mental harmony, on a daily basis, as needed for yourself. Okay, so I say if we don't have the skill and not perfect circumstances in life, okay, so if you don't have the skill and life is not thrown at you like a perfect situation, then it's typical we do things like we reach for distraction, right? I mean, you just, drown yourself in like social media for 2 or 3 hours a day, right? Just to forget about the fact that you're not happy with your life or where, the trajectory of your life. Or, substitutions where, businesses will say, oh, buy my product and you'll feel better about yourself. And, for a lot of people, it works, for a very short period of time, right? It's like, oh, a little boost. It's like eating ice cream. You feel good for a little bit, but it doesn't last because the mental health issues are still there. The unbalance is still there. Like no ice cream cone is going to fix your mental balance generally, right? And, one of the problems is, and he talks about this in the book, is that when we get so far out of balance that we have a feeling of like despair and lack of hope and, we don't even want to think about the future because we don't see a way out of the present. He says you close yourself off to opportunities and possibilities in the present, right, that can help you get to a better place in the future. And he says, I've got 2 quotes here. A man who let himself decline because he could not see any future goal found himself occupied with retrospective thoughts. Like he kept thinking about the past, to look into the past to help make the present less real. So he was saying these guys in the concentration camp, some of whom they didn't have these mental skills to try to find, a balance any way they could. They would just lose themselves in their past, think about their past, and try to dissociate themselves from the present. And you can understand, certainly in that type of situation, but even in like our normal everyday situations, you can understand the desire to just like zone out and just forget about your problems for a little while, right? But the problem is, as he says, it shuts you off to being open and observant to opportunities and possibilities that might help you get out of your situation, whether that's like a physical, life situation or a mental health situation. And he's got another quote. He says, but in robbing the present of its reality, it became easy to overlook the opportunities to make something positive of camp life. He's talking about concentration camp. But again, it's to the point of if you completely zone yourself out, you cut yourself off from being able to find ways to improve your condition. Again, whether it's a physical condition or a mental condition. Okay. And so one of the lessons that I took from this was this idea of hope, okay? And hope can really be useful in situations where, okay, you're in a situation where you have these mental tensions, they're out of balance, you're feeling a little bit of despair about the future, right? But something gives you hope. And hope can be really useful when you don't think you have or you don't recognize the skills that are necessary to get you from where you are to where you want to be. But you have hope, okay? And hope can be very useful in that respect because it can put you in a positive frame of mind, okay? Even though you're not quite sure how you're going to get from here to there. And you're not quite sure if you have the skills right now necessary to get from here to there, but you have a certain degree of hope. And so it says, okay, I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to be open to possibilities and whatever. I'm going to develop my skills to try to improve my situation. But the potential pitfall is if you rely too much on hope, right? And you kind of you're always living in the future and you don't work to develop the skills necessary to either improve your physical situation or your mental health situation. And he has a quote by Nietzsche, the famous German philosopher, "He who has a why to live for, why capital W, can bear almost any how, like a capital H." Meaning, if you have a strong enough purpose, like if you have a strong enough thing driving you to the future, whether that's a realistic hope or a vision that you have that's like really motivating you, it makes it easier to deal with your present situations. Now, I'm going to talk about how to build some of these skills based on what he talked about in this book. So again, we have these mental tensions. There are three that I discussed. And when they're in balance, we feel good. When they're out of balance, we generally feel bad. All right. And sometimes life, can just, give you a really great situation. You don't have to have the skill necessary to create this balance, because the balance is created for you. But too often, right, you need the skill in order to create balance and regain mental harmony. So skill number one that I got from this book, he says, when something is really bothering you, let's say you feel really emotionally bad about it or whatever, try viewing the situation as though you were like a third person observer. You know how when you read like a fiction book, you're sort of like a disembodied observer of the situation. You're reading the words and the narrator's telling you what this person's thinking and what this person does and whatever. His point, and this is a technique he used when he was in the concentration camp, he tried to view his situation from like an outside third person perspective, to try to detach himself in a healthy way from the effect his emotions had on his psychological health. Because you can imagine, in such a horrible condition as a concentration camp, it's easy to let your emotions overwhelm your rational thought, right? And you could just lose it, right? And you could just sink into total despair because of the situation. So one of the skills, or one of the techniques he used to build the skill was, okay, I view myself, Viktor Frankl, in this concentration camp from 30 feet away up in the air. And now it's a little bit easier to view myself in this terrible situation and to analyze, my thoughts and to analyze the situation, because I can step away from it. I'm not completely in this emotional quagmire, right, which is totally normal in situations such as these. I can view it as though I were reading a book about myself. And it's like, I have, it's because you don't want to try to control your emotions or deaden your emotions. Your emotions are healthy. It's part of being human. And you can't, we have automatic response, our emotions are automatically generated. I mean, it would be weird if you could somehow cut off your emotions and become a robot. You would stop being human. I mean, I think these are like medical conditions, like psychiatric conditions where people don't feel emotion. That's not healthy, and that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what he's talking about. It's the idea of developing the skill to control your consciousness, to control your thoughts, and say, okay, I am going to choose. I feel really bad right now. I'm going to choose to not mentally, psychologically dissociate myself, but I'm going to choose to just observe myself as a third person might, like the omniscient narrator of a fiction book might. And it really helped him, think about his situation in a more objective way when he's not so gripped by his emotions. So he has a quote. He says, I saw myself giving a lecture on this. He was a psychologist, I guess, before he was put in the concentration camp professionally. I saw myself giving a lecture on the psychology of the concentration camp. All that oppressed me at the moment became objective, seen and described from the remote viewpoint of science. So from his perspective, he detached himself and looked at himself as though he were like an outside psychologist analyzing, the situation. He continues, by this method, I succeeded in rising above the situation, above the sufferings of the moment. And it's interesting, this concept of rising above the situation. I don't know how you read when you read fiction, but, I generally view myself as being slightly above the characters and a little bit at an angle. Because for whatever reason, it's this idea of hovering above the situation helps give you a wider perspective. I mean, this is just normal. You have a wider perspective the higher you get. So he says, in rising above the situation, above the sufferings of the moment. And he quotes this 17th century Dutch philosopher Spinoza, who says, emotion, which is suffering, ceases to be suffering as soon as we form a clear and precise picture of it, right? Which, again, it speaks to this concept of if you can extract yourself from the quagmire of your emotions and look at, your mental state and your state of mental health and this lack of mental tension in the proper way, right? You can take some of the power out of the emotions, the power that they have over your consciousness. That's like, that they're just like holding you fixed in a state where you feel like you can't do anything. You can't improve your situation. Okay, that's skill number one. All right, skill number two. Okay, breaking things into small enough steps, okay, so that you feel as though you can accomplish them. And this speaks to one of the mental tensions I said, where it's like the tension between the challenge that you're presented and the skill that you have currently to meet that challenge, right? And when you feel like you have the necessary skill, you feel good. You have a feeling of agency, like a sense of personal agency. And when you feel like, wow, this challenge is way too hard, then you feel like, oh, well, there's nothing I can do. And so it sort of diminishes how you feel about yourself and how you feel about your ability to deal with a situation. So he says, breaking things into small enough steps. And so, you feel like, if here's the challenge and you can't meet this challenge, break it up into smaller steps until, each step is low enough, right, that you have the skill necessary to meet that challenge. It's the idea of using little successes to build your self-esteem. And it's the skill of being able, again, to control your consciousness, to be able to say, okay, I'm looking at this situation. The challenge is too great. How can I observe this challenge and break it apart potentially into smaller pieces so that I do feel as though each piece, okay, is not beyond my skill level, right? I mean, that's pretty much as simple as it goes. And he has a quote. He's like, in a concentration camp, there was an opportunity and a challenge. One could make a victory of those experiences, turning life into an inner triumph. All right, so again, his point is, when he was in a concentration camp, there was not a whole lot you could do about your situation on a grand scale. You couldn't just walk out of there, right? But he's like, on a very, very, very small scale, you could experience little victories for yourself. Now, I mean, it takes a lot of willpower, and it takes a lot of control over, over your thoughts to be able to break a really horrible situation down into small enough things that you can feel good. I mean, just as one example, I mean, it might be so bad that you feel like, man, if I could just tie my shoes, right? I'll feel a little bit better. Well, then tie your shoes if that's all you can handle, right? Or if you're in a situation where, the only thing you can do is have the wherewithal to be like, you know what? I can't change anything right now, but I'm going to focus on my breathing, right? That's like a tiny little mastery of you over you. It's your ability to say, okay, I'm in a situation. I can't get out of it. There are, small little things that I can do that give me this feeling of agency, this feeling of, power in some small way over some small part of my circumstance. All right, so that's skill number 2. Skill number 3. Okay, he calls this, quote, paradoxical intention. All right, it's a psychological term, right? Basically, it means you actively hope for that which you are afraid of, okay? And now, you have to understand, this is like, within bounds. He talks about one guy who, he was like sweating profusely. And so he made a game of it. And he'd go into a social situation and tell himself, okay, my goal is to sweat so much that I'm just like swimming in it, right? I'm like drenching people. I mean, so you make like a healthy little game, out of it. But you have to do it obviously within reason. And so I have, you have this, you use your imagination, to come up with this thing. And it's a way of controlling your thoughts to overcome the hold that emotions can have on you, right? And because your emotions can affect you physically, they can, cause physical responses, not just mental responses. But regardless, if you have, this like lack of mental harmony, a third skill that you can develop is saying, okay, I'm going to turn this into a game, and I'm going to stop being afraid of this thing to the point that I'm going to hope it happens, And so it's like a little bit of like using humor, kind of looking at your situation in like a humorous way, trying to make light of it. Now, obviously not every situation, you can or would want to make light of, but, these are, small skills that you can use on a daily, that you can develop on a daily basis, that will help you develop the mental capacity to bring yourself back into mental harmony, or at least to the extent that you're able. All right, and he has a quote about this. He says, the procedure consists of a reversal of the patient's attitude, inasmuch as his fear is replaced by a paradoxical wish. Okay? By this treatment, the wind is taken out of the sails of the anxiety, right? Because it's like the anxiety has a grip on you. And so if you say, you know what, I'm not going to be afraid of you talking to your anxiety, I'm going to hope it gets even worse, right? It's kind of like, wait, what? Like the anxiety is like, wait, I thought you were afraid of me. And you're like, no, dude, no, bring it, right? Bring it. The quote continues, such a procedure must make use of the specific human capacity for self-detachment inherent in a sense of humor, right? So not like, detaching yourself mentally in, in a psychologically unhealthy way, but just trying to look at your situation a little bit humorously, because that helps to emotionally detach you in a healthy way. All right, so you can build a skill of bringing this lack of this unbalanced mental tension back into a healthy balance. The quote finishes, the patient is enabled to put himself at a distance from his own neurosis. Okay, so summary, all right? If you learn how to focus and direct your thoughts, okay, and by using these skills, by using skills that you can develop through these 3 practices that I talked about, you can help contribute to your own mental health, like on just a day-to-day basis, in small ways, but ways that are meaningful. And the more you develop the skill of being able to control your thoughts, control your outlook on a situation, the easier it will be to help bring yourself back into mental balance, to bring yourself back into mental harmony, to help regain a sense of, mental health. As he says, we can't always control our circumstances, but we can control our perspective. And this is a quote not from Viktor Frankl, but Shakespeare, Hamlet. Again, this is powerful, right? There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I don't know why I'm like this, but it's really powerful. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It really comes down to your perspective and your ability to develop the skills necessary to help regain mental harmony, mental balance, mental health. Okay, man, this was an emotional thing. I don't know why, but I'm glad I'm not going to meet you in person anytime soon. Like AJT, recommended, my buddy AJT. He's really supportive of this channel. He recommended the artist, I think it's a he, I'm not quite sure, he or she, recommended The Artist's Way. I'd never heard of that book. I already checked it out from the library. I read it. AJT, thank you. It's a great book. I'm going to do a video on that next. I got a lot of really good things to say about that book. After that, this is a book I got from the library. Just reviews on Amazon were good. It was called Make Your Bed by this Navy Admiral. Really short book. That's going to be the video after The Artist's Way. And then my buddy Rassel, he was the one who had recommended Atomic Habits way back a couple months ago. He had recommended Think and Grow Rich. So that's going to be the third video I do after this. So the next one is Artist's Way, and then I'm doing one on Make Your Bed, and then Think and Grow Rich. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.